What's up, everybody? I'm Derek. This is Rocking eForge, and it is just a couple of days before Christmas. Now, if you're like me and procrastinated in making and or buying gifts for your friends and family this year, I am going to show you 4 gifts in this video that you can make in a matter of hours to stuff stockings for your family and or give gifts to your friends. So, let's get rocking. Now, pro tip, if you are smithing during the winter, your anvil is probably going to be cold when you first go out into the shop. So it's nice to have just a big piece of mild steel bar. A lot of people use pieces of wrought iron or whatever you got lying around. Big chunk of steel that you can heat up in the forge and then stick on your anvil face and let all of that heat seep into the anvil. It'll keep your pieces warmer longer, and you can actually get more done per heat because you've preheated your anvil. And it's not sucking out all of that heat that you would otherwise be losing if you didn't do this. All right, so the first gift we're gonna do here is a simple letter opener. And I'm starting with 3/8 inch square stock. And I'm just gonna start by forging a blunt taper on the tip of this. And that's just going to become the tip of the letter opener. And this started out as a 9-inch piece. You can make this longer or shorter, or use larger stock or smaller stock. This is just the easiest way I can think of to make a quick, simple letter opener. And we're gonna do about a 4-inch handle back here and a 5-inch-ish blade. I'm gonna flip this around and work on the handle because if you're gonna make something for somebody, you definitely want it to be nice and pretty and ornate. And I'm gonna focus on the handle for a little bit before we go back to the blade. And for that handle, I think I'm going to put a looped hook that I do in a lot of my bottle openers and things, just to make it nice and pretty and give someone the opportunity to hang it on a hook over their desk or what have you, wherever they need a letter opener. And it kind of gives this end a little bit more decoration than just the flat tip. So that's what we're gonna do next. And then once you've got that thin enough, I'm just gonna go next heat to the far edge of the anvil, forge the tip into a nice slim taper, and then bring that taper back to kind of blend everything together. And then we'll curl that around into a scroll and turn that into a nice hanging loop there at the end. And I'm just gonna go ahead and, before I do any extra work here, just knock down these corners. And knock down the corners on the rat tail. Being very careful not to mess up the actual shoulder here. And I'm scrolling away from where I want the loop to actually go. And then I'm gonna really lightly, I'm gonna slightly kick that off to one toward the corner. Because I'm going to scroll it this direction when I come back in the next heat to meet up at this corner. And if you do that, if you don't kick it off, it'll go straight out and then kind of loop around. I want more of an even loop, and hopefully that becomes apparent when I actually come in and do this. And I'm going to cool off the scroll itself in just water, because this is mild steel, just so that when I strike on it, it doesn't mess it up, because I'm going to just use the horn of the anvil to curl this around, and I don't want to collapse that scroll if I can avoid it. And you kind of got to just change the angle of your hammer blows depending on what shape you're getting out of it, what shape you want out of it. And there we have a nice little pretty loop. The next step I'm going to do here is just make sure that all of the corners are knocked off, and you can do this relatively cold. And I'm going to try a fairly intricate twist here, in that I'm going to do a split on all 4 sides, which will start what looks like a split twist, and then I'm going to cut in on 2 of the corners to make a kind of Rubik's twist, but it's going to be longer than the normal Rubik's twist, and with these rounded or chamfered corners that we've got here, and I'm gonna do my darndest to make this look as even as possible on all 4 corners. I think it'll look really nice, and we'll see how this turns out. And I'm just coming in here every 1/2 inch, putting in a mark to just give me where to cut on the bandsaw. All right, so as usual, I'm cooling off just the end where the loop is and a little bit of the 3/8 inch stock before I come and lock it in the vise here. And I'm gonna lock it right where the, right where the handle is supposed to stop so that I'm not twisting extra. And I cooled this off so that I can attach my wrench, twisting wrench here, once I get it fit to the right size, without it deforming. I think I'm going to go a little bit farther. All right, so I'm coming to the stump here. I'm just straightening everything out. And I'm using the stump and this half of an old axe handle that I had to avoid forging down and flattening out any of the corners or messing up the twists that we've got here, while still getting it back to straight. But that looks pretty good. So now we're going to spin it around, and we'll get back to working on the blade of this letter opener. And we are simply going to come to the flat of the anvil, or you could do this on the horn as well, but I'm just going to flatten this on the diagonal. And something to make sure not to do is don't get too close to the edge of the anvil in your forging here, so that you don't end up with a big divot thanks to the edge of the anvil. Once I get a little closer to the handle, I am going to bring it to the horn of the anvil and use my rounding hammer to kind of rough in that transition from the handle to the blade. All right, so that's looking pretty thick for a letter opener for sure. So we're just going to keep flattening this, and then we'll grind everything to shape at the last stages of this letter opener, because I want it fairly thin. Let's see, what are we sitting at right now? Probably 1/4, just under a 1/4 inch. I think what I want for this blade is an 1/8 at the widest, and then we'll grind in the pseudo bevels to make it a more functional letter opener. All right, so we've gotten this all flattened out. Now I'm going to cool this off and take it to the grinder, grind in a quick profile, clean up this tip a little bit, make it a little more fine and elegant, and then just some quick bevels, because this is meant to be kind of a last-second gift, right? And we've already spent quite a while making this, so the rest of the projects in this video will be a little shorter in order to compensate. All right, so now I'm going to come awkwardly hold this against the horn of the anvil so I don't mess up anything, and then go ahead and touch mark. Sweet. Make sure everything is straight. Then I'm going to give this a nice brushing. I'm going to finish this off with a little bit of beeswax, and this will provide a nice seal to avoid any rust on the metal. And you want to do this hot enough to smoke so that it kind of bakes on there, like when you're seasoning a cast iron pan. Not so hot that it catches fire. Let it smoke for a minute and then wipe down the excess with a shop towel. And that finishes up the first project of this video, so we will move on to the next one. This time I'm using a piece of 3/8 inch round stock by square stock, but you can start with square if that's what you've got. All right, so what we're gonna make next is a simple Viking style steel bangle. And I'm gonna start out by forging a nice taper, and I'm right down to a point, and I'm gonna draw that back about 3 inches, maybe 4. I haven't quite thought through the logistics of this yet, so we're kind of just winging it. All right, so I've got this forged out to pretty much exactly 3 inches from where the sharp corner starts all the way down to the tip of that. Now, the challenge is going to be matching that 3 inches in the opposite direction, leaving a little bit of space in the middle to kind of act as the transition from the taper up to just a point and then back down to another taper. So, in order to facilitate that, from that point where the taper starts that direction, I'm going to guesstimate about 2 inches of extra material to draw that taper out. And I'm going to mark that just by using the edge of the anvil cold. And we're going to start forging a reverse taper the opposite direction next heat. And I want to try my darndest to keep these surfaces in line as much as possible. I'm going to end up forging this round anyway, but the better I can keep it in line, the better this will work out. And now that we've got this forged down real small, I'm just going to grab this, wiggle it right off, and then we'll start using a pair of tongs in order to continue forging this down to that taper. I think that puts me right at about 3 inches. A little short. Pretty close to spot on. All right, so now I've got this forged out to just over 6.5 inches long. My wrist is about 7 inches around, so the plan here is to have just enough material to wrap around my wrist completely, and then there's going to be an opening that will slide sideways over my wrist in order to fit on my hand, because obviously trying to fit my hand through a ring of steel is not going to work. So in order to facilitate getting just a little bit of extra length and make this a little more ornate, we're going to forge this round now, and that'll give us some extra length when we forge down on these corners. And we're going to follow the blacksmith fundamental of going from square to octagon to round. So the next heat I'm going to come in and forge these corners down to make this an octagon shape, and we'll do that on both sides, and then we'll forge the whole thing round after that. We're going to try to get this as even as possible, as close to exactly octagonal as we can. Okay, and so now I've got those corners forged in, and I'm honestly kind of liking the way this looks, just the way it is. So let's check our length here. And after we've forged in those corners, we have hit precisely 7 inches. So I think I'm going to call that good because I like the way that design came out, honestly. Now I'm just going to make sure that everything is all nice and smooth, planish all the surfaces. All right, so now to give this a little bit more style, I'm going to go ahead and flatten out here toward the center before I end up curving and curling this in order to kind of give it a little piece of decoration, so to speak. I'm going to go ahead and forge in a rune. Given this is Viking themed, I'm going to do the Viking rune for water. In order to fit enough material here, I'm going to forge this center portion flat and then use a ball end punch to spread that out a little bit and give it kind of a little spot to put a rune in. And I'm going to touch mark this and hope that forging on the opposite side isn't going to ruin it entirely, but it probably will. All right, and I'm going to use a ball peen here to just provide a little bit of extra spreading and probably flatten my touch mark into the anvil and planish that. Use the rounding hammer to work out all of those bumps that were there. That seems to have survived mostly. I'm just going to use another hot cut chisel to put in the rune for water, mostly because it's super simple. And now I'm going to throw it on the ground. We're going to go ahead and put a scroll in opposite directions on either end and then forge this into the shape of a bracelet, or a bangle, more accurately. I'm just taking the last second to even out the kind of most visible surface here. Make it look as nice as possible before we round this up. That side's looking pretty good, honestly. Next, I'm going to cool off the scroll, and then I'm going to bend this end, or this arm of the bracelet in, not perfectly circular. I'm trying to get wider in one direction than the other, and that should fit the shape of my wrist. All right, so now this project can be very fiddly, let's just say, in trying to get it to fit perfectly. So you will probably want to ask your loved one or friend or whoever you're making this for a measurement around their wrist to at least get it in the right direction. But the concept here is that this gap is wide enough to fit your wrist in sideways, and then you turn your wrist inside and it fits your wrist around that direction, and it makes a nice stylish bangle. It's pretty tight here, so I'm going to go ahead and widen this out. I'm going to do that by supporting here and hammering on the unsupported portion of this to try to open that up, and it looks like I already did pretty good at that. And I'm going to do that on both sides just to make it consistent. Okay, that looks like it might be better, just to make this a little bit more consistent between the two sides. There we go. Hey, there we go. And it stays on pretty well. And all you have to do is, rotate and pull it off, and it's all good. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this back in the fire, and we'll get this brushed up and treated with some beeswax, and then we will move on to the next project. Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna let that keep smoking, and we will move on to the next project. We are going back to a piece of 3/8" square stock for this next project. All right, so the project we're gonna do here is going to be a simple leaf keychain. Oh man. So I'm gonna forge a relatively blunt two-sided taper here. So notice this is biased toward these two sides. The next heat, I'm going to bring this back over, and instead of going this side up, I'm going to put that side face down and forge in a shoulder on these two faces, and that'll establish the preform for the leaf. And I'm just going to take this nice and slow. I'm going to take this heat nice and slow to make sure I get that shoulder really heavily established. And I'm making sure to seat it fully on the edge before I actually hammer. Because the closer these shoulders line up, the better this will look. And I'm making sure to keep these corners up off the face of the anvil. So if I'm forging with the leaf on the face, I'm putting this face and this face in contact with the anvil so I can work up here. And then when I need to get closer to the leaf, I'm sticking it off the edge of the anvil and making sure those corners seat up against the edge. And I'm going to forge a reverse taper to finish off this stem of this leaf. And we're going to round this up and turn this into a nice pretty keychain here in a minute. And I'm working on moving the thickest part of the stem up closer to the leaf itself. That's because I want the mass of the loop to be thickest at that point way up here, and then this will kind of curl around and do something fancy later. So I want this to be pretty thin and delicate, and I'll probably end up cutting this shorter because it's pretty long, but I'd rather start with too much material than too little. And then once I've got this to about where I want it, I'm just going to knock these corners off like I have on every project in this video so far. We'll forge this down to an octagon. This isn't super crazy or necessary down here yet because I'm going to end up forging this down to a really thin scroll down there. But I want to do this up here by the leaf at the very least before I flatten it, because it's easier to get into these corners prior to flattening the leaf. First of all, I'm just going to come in at an odd angle here and forge that corner down, because if you don't pre-forge in this corner, it'll curl over and create a cold shut right here at the junction between the stem and the leaf. And this is another way to kind of hopefully deal with that corner. All right, so next step is I'm going to heat this up and flatten this leaf using the flat side of my rounding hammer, and then I'm going to flip it over to the rounding side and try to get some extra spreading using the round side of that. All right, so I've got that forged down pretty flat, relatively flat. I'm just going to even out that surface, and what I'm going to come in and do here is come in with a fuller and fuller down the middle and fuller a couple of times on each edge and turn that into kind of what I call a thick leaf. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. And it's amazing how quickly this leaf comes together once you start doing the thick veins on the sides, because it looks pretty bad until you start putting in those extra lumps on the sides. And I'm going to deepen those as we go, because I think it looks really nice and it adds a lot of really cool shape to it. All right. I'd say I'm getting to the point where I'm messing up the tip more than I'm helping, so I'm going to go ahead and call it there. I'm going to spin it back around, forge this end into a taper and scroll it, and then we will probably realize we've got way too much material and cut it and do it again. I'm just going to knock these corners back in now that I've kind of trued this up and even everything up a little bit better. And I've got a twist in here, but that's all right. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and take this to round. Just by kind of rotating and continually hammering. Not hard, these are planishing blows, not forging blows. So you're just kind of evening out all of those surfaces, or all of those, you're knocking down every edge into just more and more edges. I'm gonna scroll, do a sideways scroll here in relation to the leaf, and then I'm going to realize that this is just far too long. But we're gonna go with it. All right, so I'm gonna set this up. Come on. Pulled off a little bit too long of this. That is a-okay, and I'm going to go this way. And this is going to become the loop for the keys. So now I'm going to go ahead and heat that back up and just bring this back to the horn and bend this rather so that the leaf goes that direction so that it centers this loop above the leaf. And then I'm going to start wrapping this tail around the stem down to the leaf in order to kind of give it a little more decorative look here. And then I want to expand this main ring a little bit. So I'm going to open this up like this. All right, we're getting there. We're gonna go ahead and curl this way over so we can wrap it around the stem, and then hopefully this ends up the right length. I think I might be okay on it. All right, so I'm gonna quench the loop so that it doesn't change, or it doesn't get altered. And I'm gonna grab this with my tongs, and then hopefully get this. Sweet. Now I'm going to swap to holding the loop. In terms of trying to wrap this around, I'm going to struggle with it for the next 45 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. So what I'm going to do here is start kind of a curve, and then I'm going to bring it to the step here and try to use my cross peen, probably not holding it here. I think my plan is maybe I'm going to come in and try to forge this around a couple of times, and then I should be able to close it up just on the flat of the anvil. Keep in mind, you very much do not need to go nearly as in depth with this project. You can just make a simple loop and call it a day. I'm just trying to get fancy with it. Hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to heat just this portion and then scroll it down. I'm going to cool off the rest of it on this next heat and see if I can get it to work. I want to scroll it down kind of in front of the leaf, but I don't want it to be too big so that it, covers the leaf up completely. Whatever you do, don't take this too far and too skinny, because it will spread too much and you'll lose all of the fancy shape out of it. But you can take this to the belt grinder and grind this back to shape if you've gone a little too far. To an extent, obviously you're not gonna get all of those nice looking ridges and stuff once you've got it too skinny, but it'll at least get the shape back to where you want it. And once again, I'm going to throw this back in the fire once we got the shape all ironed out and give it a good brushing. Trying to get deep into those spots between all of the pieces of steel as best I can. And then once again, hit it with a nice layer of beeswax in order to seal it, darken it, and make it rust proof. Now that this is finished, we'll move on to the fourth and final project of this video. And we are once again starting out with a piece of 3/8 inch square stock. And I can imagine what you're thinking, none of these projects have been that fast. They've taken at least half hour, 45 minutes, maybe even a couple of hours, depending on how in-depth you want to go with it. So in this final project, I'm going to show you one that doesn't take hardly any time at all. And that's going to be a simple twisted pendant or keychain or key ornament or what have you out of any piece of square stock. You can make this as big or as small as you want, but let's show you how to do it. And the first thing that we're going to do is I got a length of 3/8 inch square. I've got a length of my square stock. Length doesn't matter. I'm going to probably cut it at the 2 to 3 inch mark, but we're going to drill a hole here toward one end. And to facilitate that, I'm just going to give it a nice center punch to seat the drill bit into as we go drill this. I'm going to use this bigger drill bit to chamfer the edges of each side of the hole. Lock this in the vise. And I'm just going to guesstimate about 2 to 3 inches. And give it a nice twist. You can twist this as much or as little as you want. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure this is all straightened up by taking it to the stump and then cut it off down at the end and turn this into a nice pendant. And then quench so that I can go cut this on the bandsaw. Dress up each of the corners on the belt grinder. And then briefly run this in and out of the fire a little bit so that once again I can give this piece a nice brushing. And then finish off again with a nice layer of beeswax. And you'll want to make sure that you blow out the hole because you don't want the beeswax to clog that up. But otherwise, that'll look very nice on a chain as a pendant or on a key ring as a decorative piece to have with your keys. And that is going to do it for today's video. I do hope this video gave you some last-second inspiration for any Christmas gifts that you were trying to make for friends or family. And if it did, please let me know in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member of my YouTube channel. And I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And as always, keep on rocking.